Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Unicorn. I'm Emily Davis. This is episode 5 of Behind the Unicorn. And today we are going to talk about consulting again. But this time I'm going to talk about consulting from the lens of wanting to become a consultant. So I have a blog post that I wrote a long time ago called So You Want to Be a Consultant? And we're going to talk about that today. The topic, how to become a consultant, things you need to think about. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the pitfalls? And I'm going to be speaking specifically about nonprofit consulting because this is a nonprofit podcast. Speaking of which, Behind the Unicorn is a podcast I've started to talk about all things nonprofit, how nonprofits work and how they should really work. Because I think there's sometimes a pretty big chasm between how nonprofits work and how nonprofits should work. I often say and remind people that nonprofit is tax status. It's not a business strategy. And so it becomes really, really important for us in this space, anyone who's involved with nonprofits, from staff to volunteers to board members who are volunteers, to donors and philanthropists, to all understand the nonprofit world. It's one of those things that it's an incredibly important part of American society, our economy, and yet it's widely misunderstood. Oftentimes it's seen as charity and sacrifice and martyrdom, when in fact, that's not at all how it should be. We play a very important role in culture and society, supporting communities, solving issues that the private sector and the government sectors can't address, or we do so in partnership. So we're standalone and we're very unique, but often misunderstood. And so each episode of the podcast is either me solo talking about a topic, or I will have guests who will join me to talk about topics so we can glean knowledge from them. And I get to have fun conversations with people and learn more, because I always like to learn. Like, learning never ends for me, as I'm sure it does for a lot of people, especially if you're listening to this podcast. So with that, let me get started a little bit on this idea of so you want to be a nonprofit consultant. How do it work? And I'll start with my story, which is that I didn't actually know anything about nonprofit consulting. That's not something I aspired to do. And yet I've been doing it almost 20 years now. So you do the math. I fell into it. I had always been in social justice work, primarily as a staff member, as a volunteer, just helping in all the ways I could. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school and I started doing projects for other organizations that I realized what I was actually doing was consulting. I'd write a resource development plan, or I would write a marketing plan, or I would write a governance plan. And through that process, I realized, oh, that's in fact what consulting is that people get paid to do this. Also, during graduate school, I was doing research on multi-generational nonprofit sector staff. And I was really focused on fundraising, which all of that later came together, which I'll come back to. In any event, I started taking on smaller projects here and there as a freelance consultant in graduate school and outside of graduate school. After I graduated from my master's in nonprofit management at Regis, my partner and I moved to San Diego for his job. And so I got a part-time job there at an organization called San Diego Grantmakers. And while I was in that job, I was also freelance consulting and co-founding Young Nonprofit Professionals Network in San Diego. And it was great. I was learning a lot, and, I was green to consulting. And I wouldn't say green to the nonprofit sector because I really grew up in it and I had worked in many nonprofits and had my master's. So I was lucky in that I had that experience. But I often found myself, because of the knowledge and experience I had, giving other organizations advice, which is really a lot of what consulting is, and helping guide them. And then I was doing a lot of trainings because I had I'd figured out how to do things. And this was in the early days of social media as a marketing strategy. So I started doing social media trainings and fundraising trainings and all of these different things. And all those pieces just started coming together. So I eventually moved back to Colorado, and I moved back. And right before I moved back, I'd been asked to write a book on fundraising called Fundraising in the Next Generation. And that really paired my knowledge of philanthropy and fundraising with my research in multi-generational nonprofit work. And so had been asked to write this book, came back to Colorado, and I was living in Boulder at the time, and was asked to apply for this executive director job. And so applied for the executive director job, got the ED job, and was writing this book at the same time, which was insanity. I also only had 3 months to write the book, which is a whole nother story, but it was bonkers. It was a lot. I'd moved back, broke up with my boyfriend, was writing a book, and starting a new job as an executive director. It was bananas. But, things seem to work out how they're supposed to. So I try to trust that. And it did. So anyway, I was the executive director of this organization and was still freelancing, consulting on the side. And then when my book came out, I had to decide if I wanted to do this consulting thing full time or not. The organization I worked for did not feel like they could give me the time off I needed to go and promote the book, speak at conferences, so on and so forth. And so I was like, now or never. And so I just fully committed to consulting as my full-time gig. I learned pretty quickly it's a hustle. Nonprofit consulting, and listen, there's a ton of different types of nonprofit consultants. I would say the most common is fundraising, because that's probably sort of the least understood and most complex aspect of nonprofits functioning. And so there are a lot of fundraising consultants out there. Also, not to be negative about my own profession, but anybody can call themselves a consultant. There's no formal nonprofit certification for consultants. There's some things here and there, but it's very much a free market. And so nonprofits really need to do their homework and do their due diligence, and every consultant is going to be different in how they approach things. What I'm trying to say is nothing is standardized. And that's a good thing because it allows for a lot of creativity. It's challenging because when you're starting out as a consultant, there's a lot to learn. And there is a lot of failing forward. It's not really something that is easily done as a hobby. Let's put it that way, kind of like running a nonprofit itself. And so when I started consulting full time, I had some runway that I'd already established myself within, because I'd been doing free or low cost speaking gigs. I'd been consulting low cost, all of these things. So I had a small portfolio, I guess you could say, of folks I could turn to as examples of my work. So I was really building all of that out. And then when I went to full-on consulting, it really was go all the time. I worked 7 days a week as much as I possibly could. I'm not saying that's the way to do it. It's just what I did. I didn't really have any boundaries when it came to my work. I hustled. And it's worked out for me pretty well. And I think I credit a lot of where I am now to that hustle and that commitment. And, I would also say that for me, what I have learned in being a consultant and working with other consultants is that a lot of people will think, oh, consulting is a nice quick fix between jobs. I think if you're freelance, that can be true. But if you are somebody who really wants to be in the space of a nonprofit consultant full time, that's your main gig, it takes years to build up your network, your brand, all of those things, your resources. And so it's not as easy as people think. It's really not that if you build it, they will come model. You have to really work hard at outreach. And it's essentially all word of mouth. Now, people may, Google you or hear, come and see you speak at a training or something like that. It's still word of mouth, because even if they're checking up on references, it's going to be word of mouth. And so for me, it was really building that my personal brand, which arguably I need to work on a lot more than I like doing, but it's not my strength. And actually, when I started my consulting company, I started an LLC, which I highly recommend. People have different models, L3C, S Corp, the whole thing. For me, I wanted to go with the simplest, and that was an LLC, and I'm a solo entrepreneur. So it's really straightforward, but it separates my consulting work from me personally, which protects me with some liability stuff. And having insurance, having liability insurance, having professional services insurance, those are all really good things to have. And they cost money, right? This stuff costs money, and it's important, but this is all part of building a business. I would say the number one thing, much like I tell nonprofits, is if you want to start a nonprofit consulting practice, you have to like running a business as much as you like doing the consulting work, because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to go into place and systems to go into place in order for you to have a successful, long-term, sustainable business. Again, it's more than a hobby if this is the route that you want to go. So for me, when I started and I established my LLC, my company was called Emily Davis and Associates Consulting, EDA Consulting. And I had a logo made, and I can't even remember who did it. But I loved it. It was, colors I liked, and it said EDA Consulting, lovely. And it worked. I mean, it was fine. Years later, I think this was around the time my book came out or after the book came out. I think it's probably after. I did a rebrand. I know it was after now that I'm thinking about it. I did a rebrand. And one of the things that came out of the rebrand is that folks who, talked to the consultants about me said, we don't know who EDA Consulting is. We know who Emily Davis is. And so I had to get comfortable with the idea of me and my name as a personal brand. I will also say that when I started, the best piece of advice that I got was to use my name in my company name. So, Jane Doe Consulting. Personally, I have no desire to scale so that I would have partners or a bunch of folks working for me. That was by design. I did not want to take that on in my consulting work. Other people do. They want to scale. I like doing the work myself. I've had assistants here and there, but I believe that when people hire Emily Davis Consulting, they want to hire me. And I've heard that from clients who've said, we want to make sure that we're hiring you and not an associate or something like that. which is just personal preference for on my end as a consultant, personal preference for nonprofit clients. Other people feel differently, but I had no desire to be too hands off in my consulting work and doing more management and sort of training up or building out tools and processes that I would teach other people. I just wanted to do it myself. For me, that was simpler, not necessarily easier, but simpler. And so I do have a very part-time assistant who worked for me years ago and is back, and she's delightful. Thank you, Kaylee. You're the greatest. And yeah, so I have support, and I like to be solo. I like to roll like that. So in any event, so when I did this rebrand, I had a new name, I had a new logo. And so I really like it. I still really like it. Part of that rebranding was identifying, my style and my approach and how that would come through in the way I talk to clients, my proposals, my website, all of that stuff. And I have to say it was enormously helpful. I don't know that I would have been able to do that as successfully when I first started, because I just don't know that I had enough experience under my belt to really know who I was as a consultant. And when I started consulting, I started in fundraising, and then that changed. So, that has an impact too. I would say, if you're starting a nonprofit consulting business, decide if you're going to be a generalist or a specialist. I was very much a generalist when I started, meaning I would do a little bit of everything with a larger focus on fundraising. But as time went on, I became more of a specialist in board governance, in multi-generational family philanthropy, facilitation, all of those kinds of nonprofit startup, all of those kinds of things. And so knowing what your specialty is or your area of expertise is really helps you to focus and market yourself better. Because if I'm referring you to a potential client, I need to be able to easily and quickly say, oh yes, they're a marketing specialist or they're HR specialist. And know just as much about what you are not an expert in. That's really important because people are looking for specific things. Being a generalist is really good because it helps you get a broader picture and helps expand the lens through which you're providing your expertise. But in terms of marketing yourself and promoting yourself and your brand, the more specific and more specialized you are, the easier it is for people. I think as a consultant, what becomes really important is that we look at our work through the lens of the client. What do they need to get this work done? Now, on the flip side of that, I did that so much that I burned myself out. So it's also important to have boundaries. Is being available 24/7 isn't sustainable. And so I think it's really important to learn what your boundaries are. I personally, except for a short period, I have not had a partner or kids. And so setting those boundaries are really important for me because otherwise, personally, I will just work. I'll just go nonstop. And it's really important to have non-client quiet space to be creative, to work on the business, to develop certain things. So the other investment that I think is incredibly important is investing in my own learning. So the obvious one was graduate school. But before I was in graduate school, I'm just one of those people who's a lifelong learner. So I was constantly sending myself to trainings and conferences and all that, and on my own dime, right? I did a lot of pro bono trainings online or in person. I wasn't intentional about this, but looking back, I really needed that experience. I really needed to learn not just the public speaking and the facilitation part of speaking, but I also needed to learn the ins and the outs of negotiating speaking agreements and contracts and all those. And it gave me time early on to fail forward, to learn from, oh man, I really should have put in this clause. Like I need all of the logistics confirmed 1 week in advance of the training, right? Or here's an intellectual property clause. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my content has been, I don't know if I should say stolen or repurposed, but it hasn't been credited. And that doesn't feel good. Like when you spend all the time and energy building out the content and it's just swiped, it's not a good feeling. So I needed that time to develop some of the business elements of my consulting work. And, sort of on that note, I think it's really important to hire an attorney to help you draft up a contract. I use simplified agreements as opposed to contracts for like my one-off trainings. I use a more comprehensive contract for longer term engagements like governance checkups and strategic plans. There's just more that goes into it, and they're higher cost and investment in a lot of different ways. So I use a formal contract that I had my attorney draft up. I would certainly recommend that. It's another financial investment, but it's a really important one because and I spend a lot of time when I'm contracting with clients or like in the proposal and contracting process. And then even while I'm consulting, I spend a lot of time explaining what consulting actually is to folks and how it works. One of the benefits of being a solo nonprofit consultant is that I work for myself. I'm the kind of person who likes that. I like that control. I want to run my own show. It works for me. The problem is when you get a nonprofit client who thinks that since they've contracted with you, that you are now their employee and you work for them. Nope. That is 100% why I chose nonprofit consulting, is so I am not somebody's employee and I don't work for them. I have a whole section in my proposals and my contracts that talks about the qualities of a good partnership between a consultant and a client. And if those qualities of a good partnership aren't being met, I have it written down so I can refer to it and say, hey, this isn't actually working. This is what we had agreed to in terms of how our partnership would work. So let's revisit what needs to happen to meet those elements that we agreed to. So I think it's really important for you as a consultant to think about what makes a really quality partnership. And along those lines, I was talking about investing in learning, and I talked about the trainings I sent myself to, and I still do because I like to learn, like I said. Graduate school, incredible, totally fantastic experience. I also, I paid for certifications. So I have multiple different kinds of facilitation certifications, which I'm one of those people that facilitate the role of a facilitator, and facilitation comes somewhat naturally to me. And it makes sense to me. I think some of that is influenced by my years on doing hotline counseling and learning about active listening. Incredibly important as a facilitator. But I don't know all the things. No one does. And so going to get certified in other facilitation methods really like opened up my mind to new tools and new approaches that I use all the time. So that was really fantastic. The other thing that I think is incredibly valuable is over the years, 2 different times, I hired executive coaches. And the first coach I worked with really helped me better understand my unique value, what I bring to the table. And it's not just knowledge. It's how I deliver information. It's how I communicate, all of those things. And so I got to better understand my unique value. Also, my favorite thing in working with her, and I'll put Diana's notes in our contact information in the notes, is because she's fantastic, is what was my ideal client? That had never occurred to me, to think about what is my ideal client. And you're kind of like almost manifesting what kind of clients you want. And I'm not talking about subject matter. And this feeds in too to the qualities of a good partnership. I wanted clients who paid on time. I know that sounds crazy, but I can't tell you how often that can be a thing. Clients who paid on time, clients that were responsive, clients that were open to learning and curious, clients that were ready to work on the project. I've had it so many times where people are like, yep, we're ready to go. We sign on to it. And they're like, oh, our board doesn't want to do this anymore. It's like, you should check that beforehand, because I'm a small business. Like, my time is money. So knowing what my ideal client was, and also what red flags to watch out for, that's a huge one. Nonprofit consulting is interesting because I, as a consultant, am being hired because there are challenges. It's not usually like everything's going great, and so we need your help to just make sure everything goes great. It keeps going great. Sometimes it happens, but not very often. Typically, it's like something's on fire and we need your help. Got it. And so I have to be mindful of where is that sweet spot between things are on fire and I can help you, and there aren't so many red flags that this is too much of a risk. For example, we want to hire you to do X, Y, and Z, and then I never hear from them again. Or they don't read what I've written to them, or I have to have 5 phone calls to get potentially hired for a training. No, it's just not a good use of my time. There needs to be, for me, there needs to be a balance between showing up and being accommodating and efficiency. Because if I spend all my time just talking about being hired and not getting hired, that's a huge loss for me. Also so we talked about things like ideal client, red flags, what's my unique value. We talked about my pricing. So for me, I don't love doing hourly rates. I find it annoying. I feel like everybody's different. A lot of people don't mind hourly rates. The problem for me is that we end up being the client, focused on the hours I've put in and not the actual work, like negotiating. Well, why is this 5 hours and not 4 hours? And we're focused on the wrong things. But the other thing is that I want to get the work done more than I want to track hours. Other people feel completely differently about that, and that's fine. I mostly do project rates, and that just gives me the flexibility to do more hours or less hours depending on the needs of the client. And in the bigger picture, some clients need more time and some need less. They're getting the same deliverables. I try to be as efficient as possible for my business, for them, the whole thing. And, I saw something recently that was interesting is if I work less hours, but I'm more efficient, that doesn't mean I should get paid less than somebody who works more hours because they're less efficient. We should be paid the same. And really, the goal in consulting, whether it's nonprofit or otherwise, is to work less hours, but make the same amount of money. And over time, you are building systems and processes that help you do that. That's what consultants really need to be doing for sustainability and for success. The other thing I started talking about with my first executive coach was working less, because I was working 7 days a week. It was bananas. She eventually got me to take, I think it was just like an Friday afternoon off. And I stopped working weekends. Sometimes I would if there was like, but I stopped doing it every weekend. And eventually I then went to work with years later, I worked with another executive coach who we did some of the similar things, and a lot more around sort of building my confidence in my consulting work, in my brand. But eventually got to the point where I don't work on Fridays. Now, the exception to that rule is if there's a retreat, because I get that. Like everybody else can do it, but the facilitator, yeah, I got you. I'll do that. But I don't work on Fridays. I work for myself. I don't take on as many clients. I work hard, but I don't take on as many clients as I used to, because I don't want to. And I find this to be more sustainable for me. I was doing multiple trainings a day in different parts of a state. It was insane. Don't do this. Do not do this. Create a sustainable model and decide what your unique value is, what your ideal client looks like, what are your red flags. And I would argue, what are your yellow flags and your red flags? Meaning, what are things that you're like, I don't feel great about this as a yellow flag, but I can work with it. And what are things that are just non-negotiable for you? Those are really important things to think about. And then think about if you're going to do hourly rates, monthly rates, project-based rates. All of those things become really important in terms of thinking about your infrastructure from your business. A couple other things that I think are really important is that it's not always going to be the right fit. If you have a client who it's not working out, it's causing you more emotional stress than anything else, it's probably a sign to let it go. And kind of like dating, the thing I have said is, listen, this is just not a good fit. And I have had clients get mad. I'm like, I can't do it. I will then prorate my time, give them whatever deliverables I may have. And let me tell you, people are people. Sometimes it's like, yep, totally get it. Other times when you fire a client, it is like a bomb exploded. And the thing, there's so much in consulting, nonprofit consulting, that goes on behind the scenes. I was just having lunch with a friend the other day and we were talking about this, is that consulting isn't just transactional. There's a lot of sort of therapy and emotional labor that goes into being a nonprofit consultant. I spend so much time with executive directors, and I'm not griping about it. That's part of my job. I enjoy it. But I spend so much time with executive directors, CEOs, board chairs, talking about their challenges, or they're stuck on an issue. Let's talk it through. And a lot of the stuff isn't technical. It's just showing up for another person and hearing them and supporting them. All the times I send out emails and I don't get responses and I have to send another email, or I have to, drop this or do that. It's a lot. You have to be okay with that. I'm not saying that you don't resent it sometimes and you don't accept, that this is tough. Consulting's hard. There's trade-offs. And some of the trade-offs for me is that I like being independent. I like running my own business. I like determining which clients I'm going to take and which I'm not. I like investing in myself, and I don't have to go through any HR or whatever to do that. But I have to pay for independent health insurance, which sucks. And I'm a relatively healthy person, and it sucks. I don't have someone to turn to when I have a difficult client, or once you've signed a client and they're difficult, you don't get to go, oh, I'm going to add on asshole tax to what we agreed on. doesn't work like that. You got to suck it up and figure it out. It's hard. It's hard work. And I think a lot of times people think it's just a plug and play, and it's not, because every organization is made up of people. And those people are people. They can be difficult. Humans are difficult. The other thing, I will say about investing in your business is, so I do a lot of training and public speaking, and which I love. And it's probably one of my favorite things to do, honestly. My background, I was a dancer for 25 years. So I think there's some element of performance in there that I enjoy on some level. But I love delivering information to people and seeing, oh, yeah, oh, wow, okay. Like, I like to watch those light bulbs go on for people. In any event, so I'm a public speaker, trainer, and I use visual elements to my trainings. In other words, PowerPoint. Here's a word about PowerPoint or any kind of slides that you use. They are not a document tool. It's a graphics tool. And I learned that years ago from some people I know who this is their whole job, is they do graphic design for slides. And so once I had, I had my brand, I had my sweet spot in terms of my expertise, my ideal client, all of these things. And I hired a company to design a slide deck theme and template that I could use. And so it wouldn't be filled with words. When you go to a training, who wants to read on the screen? If you're in the back, you're not reading. I hate that people use slides as a document tool. It drives me bonkers. Stop doing it. It's a graphics tool, but I also learned how to use graphics in different settings. So my slides, I design my slides differently for a webinar than I will for in an in-person session. And less is more. That's the other thing I've learned. So I've also invested in not just what I speak on, but the visual elements of what I do. These are all examples of things that we have to invest in as consultants to up our game. Having, marketing is really important. Having a social media presence. I happen to love my website. Shout out to Marcy Whitman. She's fantastic with Boomerang Marketing. She's done some great work for me on both print collateral and online collateral. I happen to be on social media a lot, so I post stuff. But that is something, honestly, that's an area I need some improvement too. There's always more to do. The laundry list never ends. So that's a lot of things to think about if you want to be a consultant, right? And from the lens of my experience, every consultant comes into this in a different way. But I think folks who come into it thinking, oh, it's going to be so easy to find clients and I'm just going to set up a website and it's going to happen, you're going to be disappointed. There's a huge amount of hustle. I spent so long sort of proving myself in the nonprofit space that I knew what I was doing. And then there was a time in 2020 and 2023 actually where I really needed to take a step back because I was super burnt out. I wasn't happy and I had to recalibrate. Know that that's part of it too, that's okay to do. Not everybody is made to be a consultant. That's okay. Also, living in Colorado, it's sort of, I don't know if this is true where other people live, but it just feels like everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm a consultant. It's probably because I'm surrounded by them. So get clear on, what your pricing needs to look like, what you can invest as, in your business, time and money wise, what you need to be successful, what your brand looks like, what support you need. One of the things I did was I get a lot of emails and calls from people, both in nonprofit creation and folks who want to start to be a consultant, who will say, can I take you out to coffee and pick your brain? And I actually started this Pick Emily's Brain, coaching, advising service because I always tell people my brain is completely picked over and I'm overly caffeinated. Like, it's a low cost, easily accessible way for me to give you advice. And that advice has worth. So there's a fee to it, but it's cheaper. It's cheaper than an attorney. And it'll save you time and money in the long run. So if you're someone out there who has more questions and needs support or needs some advice, that Pick Emily's Brain service is there for you if you want it. It's on my website. I'll put it in the show notes too, just in case it's helpful. But here's a few more questions that I will leave you with. A lot of these, which we've talked about. Am I in this for the long haul? Is this a long-term investment for you, or is it short term? Are you looking for immediate success? Do I have the financial flexibility to build this business? Because it takes time and it takes practice. Am I clear about my areas of expertise and what sets me apart? What's my unique value? And the other thing is, I would say this is something that people don't think about a lot, is that nonprofit consultants can get a really bad reputation as a whole because there might be a bad consulting experience that someone has, a nonprofit has, or an individual, and they'll say, I'm never hiring a consultant again. There's a lot of bad consultants out there. And are you, in starting your nonprofit consultancy, are you willing to be part of elevating the standard? Are you willing to invest in teaching people about what good consulting looks like and being part of that? What are the other financial and time constraints you might have? That's something to think about. Can you write a business plan for your practice? And if you're successful, there's people who are going to want to pick your brain and how will you pay it forward? How do you want to support other people in this field? And what does your schedule look like? Are you willing to work weekends and nights? And a lot of times, especially in the beginning, you're working on other people's schedules, not on your own. I've been doing this almost 20 years, and I'm finally more on my schedule than anything else. But that has taken a lot of practice and a lot of kind boundaries. And you have to think about, what do you need to take care of yourself so you can show up for others? In other words, how do you put your oxygen mask on first so you can be the best possible version of yourself for clients? And then lastly, is this a real commitment, or are you just dipping your toes in the water? Running a business is no joke. It takes time and energy and a lot of thought. So those are some questions that I leave you with. And my hope is, if you're interested in becoming a nonprofit consultant, that this will be a good resource for you. And even if you're a nonprofit looking to hire a consultant, again, it's another layer of pulling back the curtain on nonprofit consultants and what we have to think about in order to be sustainable. Unfortunately, I can't work pro bono because I have bills to pay. And I'm working towards a kind of life that I want. So, I set aside some pro bono time for some things, but if it's not already committed to in terms of that pro bono time, I have to charge for my time. I have spent a lot of years developing my knowledge, my delivery, my brand, and those things did not come for free either. So I hope that you got something out of this. I'm really excited to have you here. It means a lot. I would love, 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 love for you to like, to subscribe, to comment. Comments are great, and share the podcast. I'm on Substack. I'm on Apple Podcasts. I'm on YouTube. I'm trying to get my Spotify account set up, and then I'll post on all of my social media accounts. So I'm primarily on Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. So I keep it simple. See if people can find me. I'm really honored to have these conversations, and I hope you'll join in them through those comments and ask questions. And I'll have in the show notes some of the things I refer to as well. So That's it for me. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you for being here. Behind the Unicorn podcast has been a lot of fun to get started, and I look forward to more to come. All right. Have a great day.